Hello and welcome to She the People's Women's Writers Fest. Today we are here for this panel called For the Love of Love, and we're going to talk about writing romantic fiction about romantic characters. So romance, as we know, is an evergreen subject, and romantic fiction is addictive. It takes you through an emotional ride. But how has the genre been changing? So we have with us today three wonderful people to talk about it. We first up we have Zarreen Khan, who is the author of three rom-com books: I Could Quit Now, What, Koi Good News, and My Best Friend's Son's Wedding. Zarreen is based in Gurgaon. Next, we have Sara Nisha Adams. Sara is a writer and editor. She lives in London, and The Reading List is her debut novel. We also have with us, joining from California, Douglas V. Davis. He's a writer, author of the book Yoga, a Love Story, a father, husband, and a constant spiritual seeker. So I'll begin this discussion by asking my first question to Douglas. Uh, Douglas, largely, if we look at romance, we have a central love story and a satisfying ending. That's what we mean when we say, loosely, we say we are reading a romance book. So, how important it is for you to, for an author to be able to place a romance novel into a subgenre, and I mean, you have wonderfully done it in your book.
Thank you. It really is important. A lot of times it takes care of itself because I feel that love is underlying everything in the universe. So we're always talking about love, and it weaves its way into the story. But in this case, in a romance, part of the fun of a romance, part of people falling in love is how they come together under certain circumstances. So with the subgenre, it was great to write about the supernatural and my character's travels and the people he met along the way. And just to all the travails they went through helped them fall in love and made it seem real. So it was really a natural outgrowth. Uh, and as I said, because love underlies everything. So if you're paying attention to it all, it just comes together.
Right. So I'll take this conversation ahead with Zareen. And Zareen, when we talk about romance, it is almost always a young, innocent girl, who meets a more experienced man, and there is a relationship. But in your book, My Best Friend's Son's Wedding, the protagonist is a 40 plus single woman, single mother, and that in itself is breaking a lot of stereotypes. So tell us about this inspiration behind your character Minty Sue. Zareen, you need to unmute.
Yeah. Okay. So, I believe, you can't define love by age group or by demographics or by life stage, honestly. Which is why, uh, when I started thinking about this character in this particular book, I wanted to stay away from traditional romance, and explore love that happens at another life stage, and to a different mindset, and how it is different from the sort of love that happens when you're much younger. So my so my first book, for example, had somebody who was in her 20s, and it was exploring romance at that age. And in my second book, I wrote about a married couple, and that was also romance during their married life. And this one was a very interesting character to read, because at somewhere around 40, you don't feel like you're too old to fall in love. And that's all right, because you should be able to fall in love whenever you want to, and whenever you're ready for it. And But that was basically my inspiration for Minty Sood. And in my book, her son has also fallen in love at the same time. and he's getting married at the same time as she's planning to get married. So it was an interesting area to explore, to see how how the two romances crop up differently, and yet they share a similarity, because at the end of the day they are feelings, right? Romance and love is a feeling that we share universally, like Douglas had said as well.
Of course, these are universal feelings, and I will now go to Sarah and take her opinion on something. So, Sarah, this is your first book, your debut book, and your protagonist is a widower who takes to reading to honor his wife's memory. Now, you are walking into a mind of a much older man. Uh, how did you go about writing this character?
Thank you. That's a really good question. So the character of Mukesh is sort of inspired by my own dada, as well as sort of there are bits of me in there, and there are bits of my parents too. And I think I've always felt really close to my grandparents and kind of the conversations that we've had, and I found them so inspiring. But one thing I've always realized, kind of having spoken to my grandparents, is that they're not worlds apart from me. Though I'm much younger, I think there are so many things that we can connect on. So I think it was just a case of I imagined kind of putting myself in Mukesh's shoes after he has lost his wife and kind of lost that huge part of his life. And I saw both my grandmothers kind of living their lives once their husbands passed away, and sort of, I guess, getting used to that absence and getting used to living with that loss rather than necessarily moving on from it. So that's what I wanted to capture in the character of Mukesh, sort of living with grief rather than, I guess, forgetting your grief.
So, another question which comes to my mind, and I would like to know all your opinions on this, that, when we think of our protagonist, when you are thinking about a protagonist, how important it is for them to have, certain flaws in the character. They can't be perfect people. So, uh, what do you do? How do you go about this inspiration? And so, tell us about about the process. So, can I go with Zareen first?
Um, a lot of our characters are inspired by real life. And in real life, people have their flaws, no matter how perfect you may feel that they are. They all have their little bit of flaws. And so when you're writing, you don't want to show a picture which is very far removed from reality, because honestly that's like fantasy. Then it's not contemporary fiction or romance or any of the other genres. However, interestingly, when you kind of start describing them in their physicality, a lot of times you end up describing them as being more perfect than they are, because they're romantic models at the end of the day. So a lot of times you take that that leeway to kind of say, okay, this person looks perfect because my character has fallen in love with this person. So there are certain defining aspects to make this person perfect for my character. But otherwise it is the character's journey, and the journey will have not only its failures and but it will also have the person's own flaws, and learning to deal with their flaws and with their conflicts in life. So it's keeping it real in the fiction world.
Douglas, would you like to add something to that?
Well, there's not much to it. I think Zareen's answer was perfect. That's what we do as writers. We have fun showing people grow, and it's interesting because uh, growing up, I read the Christian Bible a lot, and when you look at the Old Testament, almost all of the major characters in the Old Testament had major flaws, and they were just regular people who didn't really want to do something, and God guided them to something great. And we look at that in our characters, and as Zarreen said, we can relate to them. One of my favorite characters is Bilbo Baggins from The Hobbit. You have this little character who's a hobbit who just wants to stay at home. You know, he loves his house, he loves his tea, and these guys invade his house, and before you know it, he's on an amazing journey. And I was fortunate. I lived in England at the time. I think I was in third grade, and that story was read to us every day, and it just affected my life. I said, I'm Bilbo Baggins. I want to stay at home, don't want to do much, but once I get out there, it's an adventure. And I think our characters are all the same way.
Sarah, since it is your first, it's your debut book, and a lot of people would say that when you're writing first, there's a lot of autobiographical element which goes into the first writing, and gradually one starts to separate themselves from their book. But when we're talking about romance, do you think it is possible to write romance without having a little bit of you or your experiences going into it?
I think so. In many terms, I guess my book isn't necessarily a romance, but it is a romance in terms of kind of people and friendship, and also a romance with books in lots of ways. So I think for me, so much of the book comes from my own experiences of falling in love with stories and falling in love with new friends and finding new friends and new experiences. What I loved about, so my two protagonists are very different. So there's Mukesh, who is a widower, as we've mentioned, and then there is Alicia, who is a young teenage library worker. And she sort of isn't really a reader at all, but she's getting into books for the first time. And I just loved being in her eyes, seeing books through a new reader's eyes and falling in love with the experience of reading, and I guess the magic of reading as well, because that's how books feel to me. I've always been inspired by them. They've always been my closest companions. So it's just lovely to see a character kind of enjoying that for the first time. I loved writing her and those experiences because it just reminded me of why I'm a reader, but also why I'm a writer. And I just hope that some readers might come to my book and feel that magic too.
So, in some senses, your book, books and reading are also very central to the book. Tell us a little bit more about the research and how did you, the list and how it all happened.
Yes, so I am, because I'm a fiction editor as well, I think books are my life, sort of. So it seemed only fitting that my first book would be a book about books. But yeah, so Alicia basically finds a reading list tucked within a copy of To Kill a Mockingbird, and she starts reading and recommending the books to Mukesh, and they start their friendship there. And these books sort of help them connect with each other. It helps them find points of reference with each other too. So while they might seem different on paper, they realise that actually their life experiences and some of the things they're going through are more similar than they imagined at first. So yeah, I guess the books came to me quite quickly on the list. They're books that I love. They're books that I read when I was a teenager, sort of falling in love with reading, and discovering new things in books beyond the things you study in school, and discovering enjoyment in reading. So yeah, it was a pleasure to sort of read these books, I guess, through these characters' eyes. I actually didn't read all the books again when I wrote the book, which was maybe a bit of a risk, but I wanted to sort of try to capture that feeling of reading for the first time. I didn't want to reread and discover all the things I'd missed all that time ago. So yeah, it's very much them experiencing it the first time, and I hope that that I've done it justice.
So, Zareen, I'll just take a little ahead. As we move in a romantic novel, in a book, an essential part of a romantic relationship is also physical intimacy. Um, to you, I would like to ask about how do you go about thinking about conceptualizing physically intimate scene? Where do you draw the line, and when do you decide that I don't need this? I mean, just a kiss or just a look is enough to convey the feeling. that it needs to be conveyed here?
Um, so there are books where physical intimacy is an important part of the story, and a lot of authors therefore write that genre and it sells, and there are a lot of people who read it, and um, uh, you know uh, so I don't think there's anything that really defines it across the genre. But for me, if it adds to the story, then it's important to bring it in. And sometimes it doesn't add to the story at all. In fact, it just like in a movie, you would rather skip through some scenes because it's not really adding to the story. You really want to get to, what happens in the end. A book is exactly like that, right? So if it's not adding too much, then it's okay to leave it at a point where the reader knows what's happening. They know how much has happened, and then but they can get on with the story. And I think um, there are readers for both sorts of books. But if a book is not a hardcore romance book, if it has a theme and a story, then you may not want to spend too much time in describing the physical intimacy between the characters.
Douglas or Sarah, if you would like to add anything to that.
I think once again, Zareen covered it really well, and I agree. There can be a point where you have gratuitous intimacy, and it doesn't really keep the story going. But when things happen, within just the feel of the story, the characters usually, you know, I find they have minds of their own, and I feel as writers sometimes we're blessed to be able to tell their stories, and we may start with an idea of what we want to say, but then the character just takes over and they tell their own story and they go as far or as little as they want to go.
Uh, Thank you. While continue, Sarah, do you want to add something to that?
I think Zareen and Douglas have said it perfectly. As my book doesn't have like any physical intimacy scenes in there, definitely not an expert. But as a reader, I think Zareen and Douglas are spot on. Whenever I read a book, and if it's kind of going on a little bit too long, it does sometimes pull you out of the story. And yeah, I'm someone who just like loves to know what's going to happen next.
So, Sarah, to you, my next question is, in the journey of a romance, there is I mean, in any book's journey, the secondary characters are also equally important as are the protagonists. So, tell us a bit about how you develop these characters. What is your research work like, and um, how important is for them to also have an arc in the story, a journey, an arc, character arc in the story.
Yes, so my novel is kind of peopled massively. There are so many people in my books, and that's because I love big stories. I love lots of characters, and I think every character can show you something different. And I think in my novel, both Mukesh and Alicia have quite big families, or at least their families play a really important part in their own journey. So I think it's really important for those secondary characters to have arcs of their own, because it shows you things in your main characters and your protagonists, in the way that they deal with those things, in the way they kind of predict or don't predict what's coming, through the dialogue of the scenes with these other characters. I also had lots of fun in the reading list, because the reading list is sort of found by lots of different people in the community, and it sets all these different people on a slightly different journey, from Mukesh and Alicia too. So I loved writing those characters, like sort of like little vignettes, but it was an opportunity to learn a little bit more about different people, and seeing how this one list that's the same for everyone brings out different things in different people.
Wonderful. Uh, let's go to Douglas, and I'm really intrigued, and I would like to know about in a lot of our sessions we've been talking about how it is important for women's narratives, women's gaze, how they look at the world, because essentially the large a huge body of work is from the male point of view. So I would like to ask you about your character, Anya. And I mean, since more women read romance, and I don't think I would be wrong in saying this, and more women write romance, when you're writing a romance, knowing that what is that going in your mind while conceptualizing a woman character, the woman protagonist of your book?
Well, I can say in the beginning, it's like walking on a tightrope without a net. It's really challenging to write and try and find a woman's voice, and it was a bit scary. Um, and as I said, I was just blessed with the fact that Anya, I knew where I wanted to go with the story, but she came and wrote her own story. Years ago, I saw a wonderful movie, Water. Um, I think it's a Deepa Mehta's story. Just an amazing film, and it touched me profoundly seeing what was going on in these ashrams, and I always remembered that. So when I started writing the story, the character just came and all those things. She wanted to tell that story. And I was fortunate enough to be able to catch that and try and capture what she was saying. But writing a dialogue, it is, it's scary for me writing from another point of view. And I hope I, found the voice correctly. And I'm still working on finding women's voices. Because, quite frankly, I love women and I love being able to incorporate their stories into my story. And because I think when I write a character like Anya, she has everyone I've met. She's my mother, my grandmother, my wife, all the women that I've met who've impressed me along the way. Little bits and pieces of all of them come out in the story. And I think, fortunately, because I listen a lot, it helps.
So, would like to discuss a little bit with three of you about endings, because endings are, it's a given that in a romantic novel you cannot not have a happy ending. So, when do you decide, and how do you decide what is a happy ending? Zareen, will start with you.
I'm actually a bit of a sucker for happy endings. So, I'm sure a lot of stories can
I think we all are.
not have a happy. Yeah. So, with I think it's what Douglas said about the character speaking to you. I think that kind of lends itself to what the ending is going to be. And I have to make a confession. When I was writing my last book, I had submitted my first draft to my publisher, and the ending was different. And then when I started editing it, and I could hear my character's voice again and again and again, and I ended up changing the ending. So, it was an interesting experience because I was able to justify a happy ending the first time I wrote the book as well. But I think, living with the character and the character's voice coming to me and saying, this, no, no, not this ending. This is the ending I want. That kind of helped me figure out how to write the ending.
Sarah.
Yeah, so I find endings so hard, but I think with the ending for the reading list, it almost came to me at the very beginning in lots of ways. I sort of knew how this story needed to end, and I knew where the characters were going to get to. I just kind of wasn't sure the journey that would take them there. But yes, I think my ending overall is a happy ending. I'm not going to give anything away, but there are some seeds of sadness in there too. But I always knew that I wanted to end this book with hope, and for that to be the message that sort of lasts after that final page. So yeah, I love happy endings, and because I'm a big crier with all things like books or films, I will always cry whether the ending is sad or happy. But I think I much prefer happy tears. So that's, I hope, how readers will end my book.
Douglas?
I'm a sucker for happy endings as well, but I confess, uh, as Sarah said, they're not easy. I mean, when you have an obvious ending, you know where it's going. You can write something simple and it's corny, and yes, it fits, but it doesn't work. So it's really difficult to come up with the obvious ending and work it into the story. And I had to write and rewrite the ending several times to actually make it work, because I knew where I wanted to go, but how did I get it there and have it still make sense and be true to the characters? Um, and a writing teacher once told me that Hemingway had about 30 endings for The Sun Also Rises. If you go to his library, you'll see all the 29 he didn't use, and which is really amazing. And it takes that kind of work to come up with a simple ending.
So I'll quickly take closing comments. Basically, I want to ask all of you to tell our viewers who aspire to write their book one day to what they should not do while they start writing a romance book. So, Douglas, will start with you.
Um, well, I'm not sure what they should not do. I can tell them what I think they should do. I was fortunate to have a really good. I went to a writing seminar in Edel a few years ago, and one of the exercises that we did was working on a faulty memory. And I was told that a faulty memory is a writer's best friend. Because some people, when you're trying to write, you want to recreate something that happened before. And the instructor said, no, 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 no. I don't care about what actually happened. I want you to have a faulty memory, use that as your framework, and then go from there. And that way you can make it real because you remember something that happened in your life, but you don't have to make it verbatim. Then have fun with it, be the writer, and have fun with the fiction and the words. And your framework is, okay, yes, this happened. My friend fell and he hurt his leg, and I saw him do that. But I'm going to write it in a way that this character wants. So I think when you're doing romance, if you can remember that, find something that you know happened, that you saw, stay true to it, but don't be exact, have a faulty memory. Just kind of make it up, the details as you go along, and that's the fun.
Sarah?
I think that's a brilliant one that I've never used before, but I love the idea of a faulty memory. It's so good. I think the piece of advice that I give myself as often as possible as well when I'm writing anything is just try to turn off the inner critic while you're writing, because I often find that just stops me writing anything. I'll maybe write a line and just think, oh, this isn't good enough. This will never work. But I can't start editing it until I've got something on the page. So I think that's the thing. Try to turn off that inner critic until you've got something to then edit. And then I think you can let yourself be freer and be more creative in the words that you do write.
Zarreen?
Yeah, I think both of them are given. I mean, the faulty faulty story is wonderful, and the inner critic also. I mean, you really have to switch it off because it's forever nagging you. I think my only advice is not to be in a hurry to write and finish the story and send it out into the world. I think it's better to kind of live with the idea, to live with the character, let the character keep talking to you every day for a while. And I mean, you can write the story quickly, but take time off it after you're done and go back and read it afresh. And if you still love, you basically have to love the story that you've written. And if you are not there yet, then you need to work on it some more. And that's my only advice.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of advice and really, I mean, three really key points about faulty memory in a critic and not be in a hurry. Thank you guys for joining us. I think I had a great time chatting with you, and good luck for your books, and uh, look forward to read you and your works. Thank you for being with She the People today.
Thank you, Dipshika.